Hello and welcome to the podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the organisation that's been the face of communal living in Britain since the 1980s. Whatever kind of intentional community you're interested in, whether it's communes, co-ops, co-housing or anything else, Diggers and Dreamers is where you begin. And now, here's our podcast host, Kirsten Stevens-Wood.
For today's podcast, we welcome Mary, James and Helen from the Pilsdon Community. Pilsdon has been an intentional community since the late 1950s, initially a response to post-war poverty, opening refuge to those in need. Inspired in part by a book by Nicholas Ferrar on the Little Gidding community, a religious community from the 1600s, Percy and Gaynor Smith purchased Pilsdon in 1958 with the vision of recreating the community depicted in Ferrar's book. Almost 60 years later, and Pilsdon continues as a Christian community offering refuge to people in crises. Join us for a lively discussion on how Pilsdon has developed and flourished over the years. So our guests today are the caretakers of a community in the southwest of England called Pilsdon. So I'm wondering if you might introduce yourselves.
I'm Mary Davies, and I've lived in the community for coming up to 9 years now. Yeah, that's me.
My name is James Newman, and I joined the community just over 4 years ago, just as the second lockdown started.
And I'm Helen Lynch. I'm the new Warden, and I've been here for 1 month.
Oh, wow. So you're the newest person then?
Yeah, I know nothing.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Yeah, I was wondering, I thought we might start today's session with maybe a little bit of a history of Pilsdon itself. Would one of you be able to give that?
Should I go for it? Well, actually, I had the privilege when I first came to Pilsdon back into 2016. I'd just moved from an academic position and did lots of oral history, and it was coming up to the 60th anniversary of the community. So it was really wonderful to be part of a project that we did, which was an oral history of the community. Wonderful to be able to chat with lots of former guests and members and wardens, people who've sort of been involved with the community over the years. So that was really nice to get a picture of the sweep of kind of the unfolding nature of the community, and also the unchanging nature of the community too. So the community began in 1958, and it was started up by a couple, Percy and Gaynor Smith. Percy was a priest, and he'd been inspired by the Little Gidding community, which was set up by Nicholas Ferrar in the mid 1600s, and that had been the model. Really, had been a lay community that was sort of based on an extended family, but it had a lot of monastic rhythms to it. So it was quite a monastic community with prayer 4 times a day, and this really inspired Percy and Gaynor. And I think it was, after the war, I think they saw a lot of need. They saw a lot of people who were struggling with, I suppose, it would have been PTSD, lots of people, wayfarers, people on the street, people who were struggling with their mental health. And Percy and Gaynor, I think, saw the opportunity of starting a community, having the stability of the rhythms, those monastic rhythms, and inviting people who were struggling with things in their life to come and be part of that community. And in fact, what's really wonderful now is if you walk around, and especially if you speak to some people who've known it for a long period of time, they'll say things like, oh, this yard was, concreted over by this group of guys who came, during the 1950s or the 1970s, or this roof was retiled by, this this guy who was a roofer and he'd fallen into difficult times. So it's sort of like the community has been built through the people who sort of started it, who had more of a vocational sense of coming into community and a more intentional idea about what they wanted to live and how they wanted to live, alongside this kind of hospitality of people who were struggling, people who are on the edges, people who were down on their luck, as they might have said. And they built the community together with those people. So it was like this mutual collaboration, I suppose. And, you know, it's maintained a lot of the same, certainly the same rhythm. We still have 4 times of prayer a day, and we still maintain this, I suppose it's quite a monastic idea of creating stability with our rhythms that enable us to invite people in who are, you know, struggling in one way or another. And I mean, I think we're very aware that everyone and anyone can be struggling at some point in their life. And we recognise that, and the sort of solidarity with that. So yeah, so that's kind of its sort of history or its beginnings. But I mean, maybe Jamie, did you say about like some of what the community's actually done, like its kind of activities or whatever over the years?
Yeah, so to give you a bit of a picture, there's quite a cross section of kind of people are here for different reasons to some extent, and we're all a bit of a mix. So a lot of what we do is about the welcoming of people to our community, and there's quite a through flow of people. That's how it's set up and designed. So you have your members who are people that have committed to being in community together, and they're kind of holding the structure of it together. But then you've also got guests, what we call guests, and they're basically people who are welcome to come and be part of our community with us. And there's no requirement for them to carry on the religious practices that we might do here with our praying 4 times a day and services. And we kind of follow the liturgical year with the Anglican kind of background that we've got. But some people like to get involved to different levels. Some people just want to be here and benefit from being in their rhythms. But guests can be here much longer than actual members. So we've got a whole range of people coming from, someone's been here 40 years, and other people have been here just over a year. So there's quite a few people here in the community that are quite long-term guests. But then we also, because of that setup, we invite people who want to come and volunteer with us. So they might come and spend a bit of time, anytime from sort of a week or 2. Some people commit for longer. So it's nice to have long-term visitors who would come for, say, 6 months to a year and really kind of work with us and alongside us. And then we have space for respite people who just need a bit of a break. We've got some accommodation. They might want to come for a weekend or maybe a week and just enjoy the benefit of the kind of more. We're kind of in a very rural environment here, so we're six miles away from town in Bridport, and we're surrounded by fields and fields, and so the community is very much within itself, as opposed to interacting a lot with the surroundings because it is very rural. But people come and find it a very kind of peaceful, relaxing place to be. And then on weekends, we have space for wayfarers. So we would normally expect to be welcoming wayfarers on a Friday, and they would stay till Monday morning, and they join in with us. And we communally eat together, and that's a very important practice for us because that's the only really time of the day that we all gather and collect. And there's something lovely about just being able to use the produce from the land here. We're not completely self-sufficient, but we obviously grow what we can, and we have animals here, so we're pretty much self-sufficient in meat.
Can I just for those people who are listening to this and have never visited Pilsdon, maybe you could give us a kind of a visual picture of what Pilsdon looks like and the shape and size of it, so that people can get an image in their minds of that.
Yeah, so it's I guess I'm coming at it with fresh eyes, having the first time I came here was last year. So we've got how many, 10 acres?
13 acres.
13 acres. So we've got fields around, and then at the heart of it is a Jacobean manor house, which is rather special. And behind the house, there's a kind of horseshoe-shaped courtyard with farm buildings and accommodation buildings all around the side. So there are we call the loose boxes, which are slightly more glamorous than that sounds, which is accommodation for wayfarers. And then you go along a few doors, and there's the cows, and the pigsty, and there's a room with a. I keep opening new doors and finding things I didn't know. There's a room, sports room with some snooker table and dartboard and things like that. And so that's all gathered around the courtyard, and then we have a big vegetable garden with it's just coming into that time of year where all the things need to happen, isn't it? And a small orchard, and then grazing fields around the edges, and then we have also a little church kind of at the front near the house. So it's a very small stagger down the hill for morning prayer at 7:30 in the morning. So yes, there's all sorts of nooks and crannies. It's a really interesting and beautiful place to be. And then outside, we're surrounded by all these beautiful hills, and we have Pilsdon Pen, Iron Age hill fort out the back. So I've come down here from Norfolk, so I'm still getting used to these lumpy things that are around about. But it's stunning, really beautiful.
And just to reel back to the history, that it's really interesting, you Helen just mentioning the church there. Percy and Gaynor actually lived in Hawkchurch, which was just down the road, and they were looking for somewhere to start this community, which they called, an experiment in living together, which of course they didn't think it was going to last 68 years or whatever. But when they came, somebody told them about this place, and as Helen describes it, it's more or less as we've gained a little bit of land, but it's more or less as sort of Helen described. That's what they arrived to see. But they saw the church, and it reminded them immediately of the church at Little Gidding that they'd been so inspired by, and so they were obviously putting it all together in their minds and feeling very kind of encouraged by that. And then they bought the whole thing, including a house, a kind of small cottage nearby, for £5,000 at auction in 1958. So that and I think its position, like lots of people say, when they've come, like Helen was saying, it's at the bottom of the Pen, it's nestled in this kind of the middle of this, rural environment. And a lot of it, lots of people say, I think, that a lot of its, success, or its enduring resilience, or its enduring kind of appeal has been its position in the landscape and its proximity, it's the distance from anywhere, really. And back in the day, like nowadays people turn up in taxis, of course, but back in the day, these wayfarer guys would be a part of their loop of going to different monasteries, working there for a week or two, and coming round to visit Pilsdon, and knowing that they would receive a welcome, and then they would they'd wash up, they'd sweep the yard, they'd do a bit of bricklaying, whatever it was that they do. And I mean, Percy was very charismatic, sort of first warden of the community, and he sort of schmoozed with both the kind of, he was very involved in universities and other churches and places where there was quite a lot of wealth, and he would talk about Pilsdon there and raise money for the community. But at the same time, in the same week, he might go to a prison, stand outside the doors of a prison, and when people were leaving, just say, hey, we've got this community, do you want to come and live with us? Had really good relationships with probation service, and different ways in which different people came to make up the community. And I think that's one of the things that's changed, gradually over time, like who's coming, what people's needs are, how the community, the people who are running the community understand those needs or work with those needs, and the kind of the landscape of, whether it's the landscape of housing or whether it's the landscape of benefits or relationship with the employment, the job centre and things. As that landscape's changed, Pilsdon changes too, because we, the people who come and stay with us, and that's part of our way that we run the community, because we have their housing benefits. It comes to us to enable us to kind of keep them in a sense. But as all of those things change, Pilsdon has to respond and understand those relationships, and that has changed. That has changed a lot. And the other thing I'll say before I stop talking is, Helen mentioned about the loose boxes and everything, and I think that's another thing that's changed over time. Is when people first came here as members, and indeed guests, people were living in dormitories, people were living in the loose boxes, people were living in sort of a much more rough and ready situation, whereas now I think people are having a greater expectation of having their own rooms and not having rats running over their heads at night and that sort of thing. So there has been a gradual there's been a gradual sort of shift in that.
I do feel like you're slightly underselling yourselves here, because I've visited Pilsdon and I've had a little look in what you're calling the loose boxes, and they are little private self-contained rooms with clean beds, and they're just little rooms, and they look comfortable and cozy and private, and it's quite a phenomenal thing to be offering, in this day and age, to be offering that as a obviously there are some underpinning rules, but very few people can come on a very free basis. Just before we go into that, I'm just going to kind of loop us back to the underpinning philosophy. So you've talked about Percy and the beginnings of the community. So have they always been underpinned by a sort of a Christian philosophy? Can you maybe tell us a bit about that?
Well, yeah. So Percy and Gaynor. Well, Percy was running a church as he would have been the vicar of a church in Hall Church up the road when they were scoping for the place. And then it was obviously an experiment for them to see, well, can we do it from here? So the church that's on site isn't currently part of a parish setup. However, we do have a Sunday service. And because the warden is a priest, enables us to then hold that space that people can come and join us in. So it's always had that space, and those Christian practices have been going on since the start. So it's just been part of the DNA of the place, and the kind of connections that had to the kind of the wider church. But obviously, it's a very challenging way to live in community. Lots of people talk about community being the thing that they're drawn to. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely to all live together and everyone get on? And everyone living together doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's getting on. And so it is a challenging environment to go, well, in a community, how does that impact my faith? How does that impact the way what I say and what we might talk about in church, or what we might pray about? How do we actually live that out? And so that's what's really real here. We can't hide. We can't pretend. We can't put on a face every day, because the cracks are very visible. But because of that vulnerability with each other, enables us to be a lot more real. And so that is a challenging thing to say, do the words that I say match the lifestyle I live? And it often doesn't. And so that is a challenge for us to go, oh yeah, there's that desire to want to be different, or want to be more communal, want to love those people around you in a way that really impacts. And we get a different measure of that because there's such a variety of people that come. You can have trouble in life whether you're rich or poor, and you can learn from the rich can learn from the poor as the poor can learn from the rich. And actually it levels things when you've all just got to get food on the table and dig the weeds in the garden and make sure the cows are milked, So that's what's beautiful about community. You never quite know what's coming next and what you might be challenged to do or not do, and who you might be with to share that.
And also I would say, and this is maybe, I don't know, the language is quite, I always find language is can be such a barrier, to people kind of accessing things that are actually everyone's to access, in a sense. And I think sometimes the religious language and philosophies and things people might be put off by. But I think fundamentally, we talk about it, some people can come here and think this is like we're a service provider, we're providing support for people who are homeless, we're offering therapeutic space for people to recover. But actually I suppose we talk about the fact that it's more of a sacramental place. So it's a place where we're not, that it's about the quality of relationship with each other and the natural world around us, and how that informs our behavior towards each other and towards with all the relationships that we have. And that it's not a success. It's not about being a success. It's more about being a sign of something, a sign of living in a certain way that we believe in. And like James said, it is because it's very real and you can't get away from it. You're really challenged. You can't just be like living out your faith in a very, kind of put on a mask about it. It really sort of strips that all back. And I think the thing that's been the most incredibly transformative for me is living with people who are doing this courageous work around their own recovery, and I think it reminds me also of my own need to look at my own patterns and my own struggles, not in a condemnatory way, but just in a kind of way that says, how can I be working on this stuff to be more loving, because people are surrendering here, and I guess that's for me a bit at the heart of the spiritual life. It's that kind of idea of surrender, and how living in community is so much about that, and so I think the people who set up the community and the people in a way who do really well in the community are looking for this gritty, messy reality of being a human being. And as you do, you find just incredible, treasures of being real with each other and being vulnerable with each other, and that really being very healing. So, but I think because it's held in this liturgical rhythm and liturgical kind of pattern, there is so much resource, we believe, in our Christian tradition to hold some of those messy realities of being human. So I don't know, Helen, maybe you could say a bit about that, because I think coming as a priest,
I think there's something about a place like this where the rubber meets the road, really, in terms of your faith, your Christian faith. And it is about that sacramental thing. It's about taking ordinary things and making them extraordinary and finding the holiness in them, whatever that means to you. And I think it's the thing of you don't root something in Christianity because we're all perfect and we know what we're doing. It's a kind of acknowledgement of your own messiness, and that life is tricky, and we find our resources in our faith, and that helps to ground what you're doing. And I mean, I certainly in my first month here, I found the rhythm of the thing tremendously helpful, to kind of hold the day and hold the week, and also it puts things in perspective a bit, because, you know, doing something and you think, well, this is very important, and then suddenly a bell goes and you're either supposed to be saying a prayer or eating something, both of which are equally important. So, you know, it does kind of root and ground things in what you're doing. And I think that is why that kind of continuing Christian community, whether people participate in worship or not, and most people don't, it's just knowing that it's there in the background, and that space is being given to something bigger than the immediate, is I think people find a comfort in that, even if they don't kind of identify with it really.
So just for people who perhaps aren't aware, as a community, you pretty much welcome anybody, but your bottom line is that you are a dry and substance-free community. So zero, no alcohol or no substances, and that is, I'm guessing, because you have people who have issues with substances of the various types, and this provides a sort of I think you described it earlier. It's a kind of it, and having been to, I can understand this. It feels like you're sort of stepping off of the madness of the world to a completely separate space that is geographically separate. You know, you're sort of in the rolling countryside, but it's also temporally separate. You know, it's like you've just described your rhythms. So people come. They perhaps have had issues with alcohol or other different substances in the past, and then they're coming to you as a form of respite and a form of support. That's really interesting.
I was going to say, so we can't run this size of community alone. We can't just go, oh, this is how I'd like to do it. It only works because we do it together, and therefore it's very important that people that come and stay with us are willing to lend a hand. And there are many tasks to keep a large manor house and the grounds and the farm and other aspects of the garden going. So our week is structured around a very cleverly formed rota, which brings a lot of kind of structure and order to our week. And a lot of people find that very helpful, especially if you've had quite a chaotic lifestyle before coming here, where substances might have ruled your life or decided how you were going to spend your day. Cutting that out, that is replaced with, it's not a dictatorial type thing, but it's kind of saying these tasks we need to do so that we can keep going here. And so there's a real willingness from those that we live with to want to participate in that and find that whatever task you're doing is really vital for us all pulling together to make it work. And there's such a lovely diversity in that with having the farm. So we do have, we milk here by hand, and that's a sort of 5:30 in the morning start, which is a big ask for some people to get out of bed at that time and do something very practical. But it's also a beautiful thing when we get a chance to do that. And lots of people that visit know Pilsdon quite early on in their first sentences. They're going, oh, that's when I learned to milk a cow. And it slows things down. It means we haven't just got it in the fridge ready in a bottle. We've had to produce that. But we get the joy of seeing the different elements of collecting the milk, pasteurizing the milk, turning it into yogurt, butter, and other things. And so you see the process from start to finish. In a beautiful way here. Same with the garden, the things that you plant, you're also harvesting later. And there's lots of obviously metaphors with that. And with people trying to grow personally, they're also seeing it lived out practically.
Yeah, and I would say, going to your question about, you know, how we hold, so that's really such an important part, that holding with the rhythms and the jobs and the purpose. And also, what I love is when you see people welcoming, people who've just been welcomed themselves, maybe a week or two before. The way that the setup is here is then they become welcomers. and showing people around and sharing what they've been learning. But I think for me, a huge part of this, well, for all of us, is safety, this question of safety. And I think, a big part of the role of the members and, the warden is to create an environment that feels really safe. And so although that does mean, of course, we want to welcome everyone, and there is this sense of radical hospitality, especially around wayfarers and people coming on the weekends, for people to stay a longer period of time, we do have, yes, there are those basic rules about, kind of the fundamental rules of like not drinking or being, taking any substances here. But there are other kind of more subtle kind of boundaries and things that are in place here that enable people to feel safe as they do their work of recovery. And I think, James and I have been sort of, with the help of amazing volunteers and the people who've been here, living here long term, have had a year where there hasn't been many of us. So we've become like a bit of a smaller community. But our number one priority was always safety. So the reality is that sometimes when people come, and they have come from quite a chaotic place, some people just don't, well, loads of people don't get on in community, don't they? Whatever community it is that you're running and you're living in, there will be people who have certain ideas of what community is and how it looks and what their contribution is to it. And for some people, after a couple of months, they just don't, it just doesn't fit for them. And I think there's an interesting thing about, working with people in terms of addiction and struggles with mental health. And I think it's the same. I recognize that the same in myself, that when you're not feeling good, you want to isolate yourself and become an individual that like removes themselves from a community. And I found that sometimes that can be one of the biggest struggles for people, is to kind of go, come back in and be with us all, come back in and be sharing this job, sharing this food, sharing in these rhythms with us, rather than isolating yourself because you aren't feeling good. And I mean, I speak as some, from my own experience of that too. So I think, but I would say safety is a huge thing. And I think there are various aspects to that safety. And that means that when we are kind of working out who does come here, lots of people will apply, but we will be measuring and not measuring, but we will be discerning each application to say, actually, can we support you effectively? Can we support you safely? Are you able to live in this community in healthy, balanced ways in order that the community thrives as well as you? And that, I don't know, would you say that?
Yeah, because there's a contrast from the idyllic thing of coming away for a weekend and feeling like you've got out of your difficulty or stressful situation wherever else you might be living. But to live in community long term requires a certain willingness and brings up all sorts of things. Whatever you were struggling with outside of this community, you will still be struggling with internally when you come here, and it just comes out in lots of different ways. And so therefore we live that together. But there's just, what's good is, and people say, don't they, that just being in an environment where there just isn't the same judgment, there isn't the same competition. People aren't trying to achieve something that was bigger and better than before or last year. We're just trying to get through the year. We're trying to grow enough to eat. We're trying to get by and cope with each other, repair what breaks. So it's a lot different a focus than ever expanding, reaching for higher profits. It just, the nature of it means that people aren't competing with each other, but they're working alongside and together, aren't they? And they can see when others are struggling because they've struggled with themselves. Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing.
That's something very important
that people want to shoulder with each other.
And I think also the rhythm, you know, like we say, this isn't a place of, you know, a success story in a way. Like the world wants to know that, like, you know, this like linear path of towards health and healing and success, whereas I think we live both in the natural world and in our liturgical rhythms in this much more circular rhythm. And we know it in ourselves too, that you come back round to things, and you come back around to things, and you maybe deepen with things, and you maybe get another layer off or peel another thing away. And I think that's what this place does. We're not therapeutic. We're not a therapeutic community. That's very important. We're just sort of loving amateurs. But I think the rhythms, the spiritual rhythms, and actually it reminded me when you were saying that about people not coming to church. I always remember this one woman who was living with us, and the bell went for church, and she never stepped inside the church at all. And she saw me, and I wasn't going down to the church, and she was like, "Hang on, why aren't you going down to the church? You've got to be going down to the church." And it was like she wanted me to do it on her behalf almost, you know. But anyway.
Those rhythms are quite fascinating, actually, because I know when we came to visit you, initially it was like, oh my gosh, there's so much tea going on, you know, there's breakfast, and then but actually I think what you're describing is it's almost like a comforting framework of we're everyone together, you know, informal. It was very, or at least the feel for me was very informal, people sitting literally having a cup of tea and a biscuit, and then everybody gets up and gets on with the day a little bit further down the line and then back again. But it was like those touch points that were kind of built into the day. And I wondered if that was something, you know, I think Mary, you said that was something you inherited, but it also sounds like something that you really value.
Yeah.
One of the lines of the prayers that we pray at midday is, we break from the doings of our day. And that comes as such a welcome, doesn't it, to lots of visitors that we have here too. You go, oh, that's actually a choice. We're choosing to stop, not because someone's telling you or because the bells rang, but actually the discipline of stopping what you're doing. It's so easy to want to just do more of and complete something. But practicing just stopping so that actually you take the focus off your task and you just check in with everybody and see how they're doing, just changes that whole feel.
I was just thinking about, Helen, you're, you know, having come from a parish and a very busy, you know, ministry in a way, and then coming here and it's all in one place, isn't it, and everything like that. I just wonder how you already said about the rhythm already supporting you, but how it feels for you here differently.
Yeah, so I guess it holds that space. I mean, I was in a very rural patch with lots of different churches, so it's kind of the opposite of there was always somewhere else I could be, and my head was in different places. Whereas here, I guess that rhythm and the food and the prayer. I think that's one of the challenges of coming to Pilsdon, actually, is keeping up with the amount of meals. But it's a beautiful thing. But it holds that space for you, because we don't, obviously, as we've said, we're not a therapeutic community. It holds that place for people to do that work in whatever way kind of is appropriate for them. And that varies from person to person. But that holding of the space enables that kind of people to find how they fit into that, and people's contribution to the community varies depending on, you know, what they're able to do and what they've picked up. So there's people that have picked up skills that they never would have dreamed of doing. You know, our sheep expert had never been near a sheep before he came here, but now he's very excited about the lambs that are imminent. And then if people have been here for a long time, perhaps what they're able to do is less, but that's, you know, that's okay. People enable them to keep feeling their sense of worth in what they're doing, which is not to say that your worthiness comes from what you're doing or what you're producing, but it is that sense of, I have something to offer. And so it is enabling people to realise that about themselves, and that this whole thing is held in love so that they are loved. And, you know, I think for a lot of people, that's a hard thing to really believe sometimes. So, yeah, and I think that is available to anyone. So although the kind of core members are an intentional Christian community, you don't have to have any faith to kind of tap into that or draw from that. And that's, I think, it's this very kind of ecumenical and open and inclusive philosophy that's rooted in this kind of Anglican Church of England foundation, with Percy having been a vicar. And I guess that's something about the Church of England exists for everybody, whether you're members or not. And the church should as well, in a broader sense. And there's something about the fact that being the warden, you're a priest and you're licensed by the diocese with the cure of souls, which is not about mending people. That's not my job. But it's having an interest and having a heart for everybody in their whole being, really. So so that I think the membership team and the wardens have that kind of, if anything drops off, what do we do? If somebody's having a struggle, what do we do? And thinking all those things through, and then working together as a whole community. So everybody who comes has something to contribute to that discussion and that dialogue, and all those questions. It's not a dictatorship at all. It is very, the community in its broadest sense. And that's not even just the people that live here. There's people in conversation with that all over the place. And there's the anniversary, which happens in October every year, when that kind of bigness is manifest as people come to mark the anniversary of the founding of the community.
Yeah, that's a lovely time as well, isn't it? When you get this exchange. I think a lot of Pilsdon is like this story that keeps on being told, and it has a very, very strong vision at its kind of foundation, and some incredibly powerful early letters and newsletters that hold this vision very kind of as very beautifully kind of articulated. But of course, it's grown, it's changed. Some of the ways in which the community is managed or run is, less hierarchical, less sort of patriarchal, and these kinds of movements have taken place. But in a sense, it is this inherited story that keeps on being told. And then so you can have at the anniversary someone who lived here in the early 70s in conversation with someone who's living here now, and they're exchanging these stories about what Pilsdon has meant for them or done for them, or how it's saved their lives. I've heard so many people say Pilsdon has saved my life. And sometimes you'll get a legacy from somewhere, and you'll not know at all, like, the person who's left this legacy in their will, and it might be because their relative stayed here for a year and it changed their life, but also there's a quietness about, and a gentleness and a kind of hiddenness about some of those changes that take place in us and in different people. And of course lots of people leave and they haven't had, it's not like some like romanticized idea of like what you're, some people leave here angry. Some people leave here disappointed. Some people leave here unwell. It's not like we're some like kind of transformative place, which, is like a kind of production line of, repairing all of our broken parts. Some people, it's harder, but it's this combination of stories of truth telling about what it is to be a human being, I think. And I think the rhythms, the history, the vision, it all can hold all of that. And it's like a bit, some people describe it like it's like a big, piece of cloth that's got all of our sort of threads woven within it. And we all belong, everyone belongs. And, you visited now and you're part of, you're part of the story too. And that's, I think, what we really believe in here, that radical hospitality, that everyone belongs, and hopefully you'll come and visit us again.
We'd love to come again. It would be great. I'm just wondering, you have talked a lot about Pilsdon as a community. I wondered what it's like to actually be the current. Do you call yourselves wardens, caretakers? In what do you consider yourselves to be?
I mean, we're members if you're going to pin it down, but I guess everybody. Yeah, I think that sometimes the day-to-day distinctions are slightly muddier than that might suggest between members and guests and volunteers. But yeah, I think we're the story holders, I guess, at the moment. And I think that thing of stories, and it always has been very important for me, about telling your story, understanding your story, hearing other people's stories, and it does help you to, when you hear other people tell their stories, it helps to give you a deeper understanding of who they are and where they're coming from, and also to then reflect on your own story. And I think that's again goes back to the kind of the spiritual centre of the community. And Christianity is a faith that's all about storytelling, and you have these stories that come round and around through the church year and through the Pilsdon year about, oh, do you remember when we had apple pressing? You know, do you remember when we did it 2 years ago and this happened, or whatever? There are some really good stories about the history of Pilsdon, which I'm just starting to pick up the threads of as they come round. And it is those things as you cycle through the seasons and as you cycle through the year, those stories come up. And so, yeah, I think it is holding on to those. And of course, some of the most important story keepers of the place are the guests who've been here for longer than we ever will. So yes, they're a really important part of holding on to that. So I guess we take on, as members, we take on a sort of slightly greater responsibility for kind of some of the nuts and bolts of the thing, but actually we're not doing it in isolation with a deep gulf between us and anybody else. It is a community thing of the whole, whatever Pilsdon is, the kind of being of Pilsdon. Yeah.
I think there's something about the members, you know, you said the word many times then, Helen, holding. And I think there is something about the holding of the community, which we often talk about, don't we? This sort of sense of what it is to hold. And I think some of that is also the gift of being a member and the warden here, of doing your own, making sure, you know, everybody knows who's lived in community that there's, you know, projection and transference and counter transference and all these things going on. And also when you live with lots of people who've got lots of their own things going on, some of which they're conscious of, some of which they're not conscious of. And there's loads of things I'm not conscious of, but there's this sort of sense of trying to be in relationship with your own messiness. And I think the members have there's quite an important role, or quite important task that we have to do, of like understanding our own stuff, our own patterns, our own messiness, so that we can hold the community safely rather than let it all spill out all over the place, which it could quite easily do. So I think that's another part of our responsibility as holders of the community and keepers of its safety, I suppose. Yeah.
We're coming closer to the end of our time together. So I was wondering, I'd like to ask each of you in turn if you would be happy to maybe talk about what you've learned about living in community. So ultimately, you know, our series of podcasts quite often asks our guests, what learning have you taken from living collectively? I was wondering if I might start, well, whoever wants to go first.
Well, I'll go first because I've got less time to talk about it. I grew up in community, so I think for me this past month there's been lots of things that suddenly feel familiar, that I'd kind of forgotten about, even sort of quite physical things like I was cooking something in the Arga, and we had an Arga when I grew up, and that kind of just the physical opening of the door and turning things around and shoving back in again. So it's been nice drawing together, I think, lots of different aspects of things that have happened on the way, and seeing how they've come together in me being here has been really encouraging. And I think, again, like I said, that whole rhythm of the place and the prayer and the meals and for people is just worming its way into my bones, really. So yeah, it's good.
Thanks, Helen.
Yeah, I guess you're impacted on so many different levels. I was just trying to think about the different layers are and how personal it is. There's something about, by being in community, you're not having to structure your day each day. There's always a long to-do list, and you're impacted by what needs doing, but you're also sharing that with other people. So, and it's recognizing that you can do things with others and actually enjoy the moment. It's not just then about the task. And there's something quite, I love seeing people kind of try things the first time because it needs to get done and we need to have a go at it, and actually enjoying the process of learning. Here, I've definitely learned to look more, I guess, internally and recognize what's going on. And actually, we all know that this is a real privilege, when you spend time at Pilsdon, whether it's for a short or a longer stay, you're left with positive and challenging things that sit with you because it exposes that stuff in you, and then it's you choosing what you do with that, I guess. So it's often a point of reference for people, even after they've left, of when I was at Pilsdon, this came up. And so all sorts of stuff has come up for me whilst being here. And you're challenged because you're living alongside other people who think very differently to you at different times. And coming up with understanding yourself and having the chance to look at yourself, or myself, has been really powerful for me. So that obviously unearths a whole lot of stuff to a lifetime to work through and look at. But it's that privilege and that chance of what you do when you look in the mirror, when someone actually lifts up a mirror to you. So you can't hide and pretend it's not there. And it's what you do with it. And knowing that here it feels safe to look at some of that stuff because there isn't the judgmental side of things. Mm. Yeah. Mm. So it's a work in progress, but
Yeah, for me, I think, before I came to the community, my job and everything was quite individual. It was things that I was setting out to achieve. It was all on me. It was like, I need to start it, I need to see it through, and I live or die by the. No, that sounds very dramatic, but whereas being here, it's such a different way of thinking about what an outcome is, or a good outcome is, or something. And I think I can tend to find myself isolating myself if I'm not feeling great. But I think what is incredible here is that, like, I'll be on my own and I'll come out the door and I'll feel terrible, and I'll come around the corner and genuinely, I mean, I say this with real genuine like truth, really, walk around the corner and see just somebody's face, or see somebody doing something in their own way, and just feel less alone in a way, but I think more than anything, and I think we're living in this world at the moment that is really troubling and very quite egocentric and quite success oriented, and the market economy works and shapes us in certain ways, and I just genuinely think that living in community, a bit like what James was saying about looking at yourself, is like a radical act in this day and age. And I really believe that it has an impact, even though we're a small community in the middle of nowhere and there's like 20 people here, or 20 or 30 people here. I think it's a radical act to live like this. and a sign of something. And it's about being vulnerable with others, like James was saying, being vulnerable with others, dealing with your own stuff, and not letting that leak out into the world in really unhealthy ways. And of course, we're all fall very, very short of being these, ideal people in society. But community has taught me, I don't know, like more compassion for myself, as I see people struggle, and I'm able to practice compassion towards them, and they reflect back to me just this real tender, loving gaze, and I think the world just needs more spaces like this where we can be human and vulnerable together, but also laugh a lot, get our hands in the soil, eat loads of cake, shovel loads of poo, and watch things grow. Ultimately it's both profound and really mundane at exactly the same time, which is back to that what Helen's saying about the sacramental. It's the ordinary and the extraordinary, and it's been like the greatest gift of my life to live like this. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for giving your time. I know you're all really busy, and it's been really interesting and wonderful to hear all about your community. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Diggers and Dreamers, the go-to place for intentional communities in Britain. As ever, it really helps us if you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget, you can find out more about communal living at our website, diggersandreamers.org.uk. There you'll find an online directory of existing communities and developing groups within the UK, plus interactive notice boards and information about our publications. One you won't want to miss is the Diggers and Dreamers directory, which has been referred to as the Communard's Bible for 35 years. And now, to play us out, here are the Spaceheads with their tribute to our old mate, Gerard Winstanley. See you next time.